while I was president, I was asked by the Solano Land Trust to monitor a colony of tricolored blackbirds. And their one ask to do this monitoring started a cascade of events that has completely changed my life. It ended up with me deciding to completely resign from the Napa Solano Audubon board. I was also on the board of Audubon California, and I resigned from that because I wanted to free up my time so that I could pursue studying birds using this new method called bioacoustics. And so tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of how that happened to me. And first, we're going to talk about tricolored blackbirds. So these are the guys that completely stole my heart. And as a birder, you probably know it can be really hard to tell the difference between a tricolored blackbird and a red-winged blackbird. So here I've got some examples, and I have to just do that. There we go. And the tricolored blackbirds are on the left-hand side, red-winged blackbirds are on the right-hand side. And one thing that they have that's different is the tricolored blackbird has a slightly longer, more tapered bill. That can be really hard to see. But what you also can see is that the male blackbird here has a very shiny plumage compared to a duller plumage for the red-winged blackbird. Another difference is that the tricolored blackbird has this white buffy band right here, right below its epaulet, whereas a red-winged blackbird, depending upon where you're at, you either get the bicolored form, which has no yellow showing, or you get the other form of red-winged blackbird, which has a yellow part here. Now, all of that can be really hard to see, and this is one of the more challenging birds for people when they're trying to get it on their life list to know for certain that they've gotten a tricolored blackbird. Now, the females, first, I thought, oh my gosh, how in the world am I going to tell female blackbirds apart, tricolors from red wings? And after looking at them a lot, it's actually, I think, easier to tell the females than it is the males. So first of all, the red-winged blackbird female tends to have more orangey colors in it. So her color is more of a cinnamon brown, whereas the tricolored blackbird is more of a cocoa, dark chocolate brown. But the easiest thing for me is if you look at their chests. So red-winged blackbird females have these stripes, and the speckled chest goes all the way down their belly to their vent. A tricolored blackbird, the speckling starts here, but then it slowly coalesces, and by the time you get to the belly, you have a solid colored belly. All right, so that's how you can visually tell the difference between the birds, but that's not the only difference between them. They also differ dramatically in their range. So over here, we've got the red-winged blackbird's territory that's over here on the right. And you can see the red-winged blackbird is pretty much distributed throughout our area. Compare that to the tricolored blackbird. The tricolored blackbird is pretty much a California bird. There's a few cases of it being in Oregon and up in Washington and down in Baja California, but the bulk of the population lives here in California. All right. So that's a little bit of their differences, but the biggest difference, I think, between them is their behaviors. So let's imagine that you're a red-winged blackbird, and you're going into a marsh, and you're setting up your territory for the breeding season. A red-winged blackbird will move into an area, and on average, it defends a territory of about 2,000 square meters. It's been sitting there, and then the tricolored blackbirds, if I say trike, I mean tricolored blackbirds. The trikes come in and they join the red-winged blackbird. But tricolored blackbirds defend an area of about 3 square meters. So that red-winged blackbird's territory of 2,000 square meters has now just been invaded by 700 male tricolored blackbirds who do not mind, do not understand social distancing at all, go cheek to jowl with each other and just get in there and party. And I've been in the field when this has happened. You see this one red-winged blackbird, he's all cocky and excited and getting all set up and doing all of his songs and his flights and all of that. And then this thing comes in, and there's nothing he can do but just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride. It's quite amusing. Okay, this slide here, this is 2 females. This is again more about how these cooperative colonial nesters all hang out together. So they form these really big, they can be really big colonies. Sometimes So the one that I was looking at initially at Rush Ranch was a couple thousand birds, but you can have tens of thousands of birds in the same colony. Here's two females hanging out, but what I have here is a picture of their nests. So the first season I studied them, after the birds had left the colony, I went into the reeds to kind of see what had been going on that season, and I found these two nests near the edge. And you can see that there's one nest here, and there's another nest right here. So they're practically touching. So they just put nest next to nest next to nest. And the other amazing thing about their biology is not only are there thousands of birds and they're cheek to jowl with each other, but they also synchronize their behaviors. So what I mean by that is they all arrive together. There's a decision made, and then all the females decide it's time to build nests, and they all start building their nests together. And you get these streams of females just with nesting material in their mouth, just arriving and leaving and like this highway. And then they incubate all at the same time, and the colony go just dead silent. And then the babies all hatch within a few days of each other. And then at the end, the babies, when they get to fledging, fledge all together, and then they end up being their own little flock, and they end up leaving the marsh after they fledged. I have a video, and this is a video of the Rush Ranch colony at a time when the males were thinking about coming in and settling. It's questionable how it will look on your Zoom. We're going to give it a try. I apologize if it's really stuttery, but maybe some of you will get a sense of what's going on here. So let me hit play. And so you see there, you didn't see very many birds, but then all of a sudden somebody made a call and they all decided to go flying around. And they swoop around like this. And then somehow a decision is made and they all go back into the marsh, and then they sing again. So I've gotten to spend a lot of hours with these birds, and being in a colony of these birds where they're doing these synchronized behaviors together is one of the more amazing things I've ever seen. Okay. So the birds are really cool, but Solano Land Trust wasn't interested in having us come out and monitor their tricolored blackbird colony just because the birds are cool. There's lots of cool birds out there. The reason they wanted us to come and pay attention to their birds is tricolored blackbirds are in trouble. And by the way, TRBL is their banding code, four-letter banding code for those of you that use that. So TR for tri-colored, and then BL for blackbird. And how you can tell they're in trouble. So back in the 1930s, it was estimated that the population of tricolored blackbirds was between 3 million and 2 million birds. By 2017, that number had dropped to 178,000 birds. So we had less than 10% of the population left. It was so concerning about this drop that back in the 80s, it was decided that they would do these surveys every 3 years, a triennial survey, where individuals would go out on a weekend and do counts of birds. And since everybody across California was going out on the same 2-3 days, the idea was that we would get a good solid number of how many birds there were in the population. On this slide, I'm going to show you the results of a few of those more recent triennial surveys. So in 2008, there was a triennial survey that estimated that the population was at about 400,000 birds. The next one was 2017, followed by 2014. In 2014, the population was estimated to be 145,000 birds. So in only a 6-year period, we had lost over 60% of the population. And so that was really scary, and that was really concerning. And the big question is, what's causing this just rapid decline of these birds? Well, one, they naturally nest in wetlands. And we, through ignorance of how good wetlands are, have removed 90% of our wetlands in California. And so these birds just don't have the same opportunity to nest like they did in the past. Now they've adapted, and they've moved into these grain fields. So this picture I have here is a pair of tricolored blackbirds, and this is a grain called triticale. So triticale is grown by the cattle industry to feed dairy cattle. And the blackbirds like it because it's these really dense stands of vegetation that they can hide in. Unfortunately for the birds and unfortunately for the cattlemen, the seeds of the triticale need to be harvested, you know, when the oil content is richest so they can have the calories for their cattle. And the fledging of the birds often doesn't happen before they need to harvest the grain. And so when that happens, you end up losing all of the fledglings that are in that particular field. So Audubon, California realized that this was a really big problem. And they started a campaign, I believe it was in 2016, where they went, and it started out, I believe Sammy like championed this, Samantha Arthur, and like did 90% of the work at the beginning. I may have that wrong, but drove all over and back to find as many colonies as they could that were on cattle, these triticale fields. And when they found them, they would contact the owner of the field and let them know about it. And they could then go in and get a perimeter around where that bird, where the colony was, so that the dairy farmer could harvest all of the grain except for that. And then they got this campaign going. It's like $5 for 5 birds, where they had this fund of money that they could pay the farmer for not harvesting the grain that the colony was in. And the cattle farmer could still afford to feed his cattle because we were offsetting the cost that the birds were causing them. So this has been a really fantastic program. It's something that is like hand in hand, these two different organizations. I love it when it could be a working land and it's two groups working together to save the birds, instead of sometimes what ends up happening is we have to go in and use a hammer and you know, it's easier to catch flies with honey, as they say. So this is one where it's worked out really well. And since 2016, I know they've had maybe a handful of colonies that they've lost, but the majority, over 90% of the colonies that go into triticale have now been saved. So in 2017, we had another triennial survey, and there might be a little bit of good news there. That survey indicated that there was 178,000 birds in the population. Now, we're not certain that the reason for this uptick is because of all the hard work of Audubon, California. I'd love to think so. It could be that we just were trying harder that year. It could be that that year was particularly a good year for raising baby tricolored blackbirds, but we're not certain. And we were really hoping in 2020 to be able to see if this trend is continuing. But unfortunately, they had to cancel the triennial survey for 2020. And we don't have that data point. And I don't know at what point they'll be able to organize another survey, hopefully soon, so we can see if this upward swing is real or not. All right, so the Audubon California has done a fantastic job of doing something to try and reverse this declining trend. But there's other ways also that we can help with these birds. And that is to start rehabilitating properties and get more of our wetlands back. And this is what Solano Land Trust had done. Okay, so there's Rush Ranch Colony, and that is where this site is located. So we start with California here. And in California, Rush Ranch is located just north of San Francisco Bay. And if you zoom in, there's a little town called Suisun City. And for those of you that are in the know, you've probably driven Highway 12 right here, and you take a south turn here and you go right onto the Rush Ranch property. And you go past the Rush Ranch property and you end up making this little turn here. And this pond right here is the pond that they have gone in and tried to manage and create tricolored blackbird habitat. After they've done this rehabilitation of the property, and with the hope of boosting tricolored blackbird nesting, they contacted Napa Solano Audubon and they said, we would really like it if somebody could come and monitor the colony to give us an assessment of how well we've done. Are the birds doing well in this rehabilitated property? And so that's what I did. So I went out 12 times that year. I visited the colony once a week. And when I was out on the colony, I focused on observing 3 things. One, I recorded whether or not males were singing, because that indicated that there was interest in nesting. I also recorded whether or not I noticed birds, females carrying nesting material. This one is here marked in purple. So all of the no's are in white, and if there's a yes, it's colored in. Males are in green, females are in purple. And I also noted whether or not on a visit I saw, and both adults feed the nestlings, by the way, whether or not I saw adults carrying food. It's kind of funny. The males don't help build the nest, but they definitely do help with feeding the nestlings. And so these were my assays and these are my results. And so at the end of this year, I was able to tell them, well, yeah, it looked like you had 2 rounds of nesting. I see that because I see females carrying nesting material, and it's followed by them carrying food. And then I saw it again. They started carrying nesting material again, and that was followed by carrying food. I wasn't able to give them much more than a fuzzy answer though, because I didn't have exact dates, because I'd only visited about once a week. And what was really frustrating to me is I missed both rounds of fledging. So when tricolored blackbirds fledge, they stay in the marsh, they stay in the marsh, they stay in the marsh, they pop up 3-4 days, and then they're gone. And so if you're not there on the exact right days, you don't get to see the babies leave the nest. So I couldn't say with 100% confidence that these birds fledged and successfully left. They probably did, but I would have felt a whole lot better if I could have actually seen some fledglings or had gotten a little bit more data around the time that they were fledging. So that's why I've got this little bit of a question mark, and that, you know, I wish I had known more. So I had decided, okay, 2017, we're going to double down. We're going to really understand what's going on with these birds. I got some funding. Part of it was through Audubon, California, and part of it was through the Solano Propagation Fund. And between the 2 of those, I was able to hire 2 of these interns that Mark was referring to earlier, and they helped me with this project. And we visited this colony twice a week. The idea is, well, if we see them twice as much, we'll have twice as much data, and we'll have a better idea what's going on. But at the same time, we were planning all of that, and this was with Alex Green and Julie Woodruff, by the way, for those of you that know who those wonderful individuals are. I had this idea. So there was this other group that I was working with called Soundscapes to Landscapes. So this is a project, and Mark referred to them earlier. This is a project that's run between Point Blue and Sonoma State University. And their goal was to put audio recorders throughout Sonoma County, and from those recordings determine which birds were in which habitats. So they would go and they would deploy a recorder, they leave it at a specific location for 4 days, they'd bring the recorder back, and then they'd go put it in another habitat for a period of time. And they had a rash of 20, 40 of these recorders that would all go out. Yeah, and their goal was to make a recipe for where robins like, you know, maybe they like elevation and tall trees and a certain amount of wetness and all that. There's actually a lot more detail into it. It involves satellites and NASA. NASA actually is funding this, and I don't have time to go into it tonight, but it's a fantastic project. But the thing that struck me about this project was that they had data not only every day when they deployed it, they had multiple data points every single day because they had programmed the recorders to record 1 minute of audio every 10 minutes. So they were sampling, and they had ears in the field and heard a lot about what was going on. And so I got to thinking, well, what if I were to put an audio recorder in my tricolored blackbird colony? What kind of information could I get if I did that? And instead of going, what are all the different species I can see, what could I learn about one species by recording them for a breeding season? So with this idea, I went and I made an appointment with Dr. Robert Meese, and we met in his office, and I told him, you know, I want to do audio recording of tricolored blackbirds. I want to figure out all the different vocalizations and what they mean, and when they say it. What do you think? Has somebody done this before? And he got really excited and says, you know, I've been wanting somebody to go out in the field to do a project like this, and no, I haven't been able to convince anybody to do it. So yeah, go and do it. And then we sat there and made bets about how many different vocalizations I thought I could get, and it was quite fun. So I thank Bob here for encouraging me to tackle this project. And with his encouragement, I decided, okay, we're gonna do this thing. But before I go on to do this thing, I wanna talk about bioacoustics and monitoring and bioacoustic analysis. Those sound like scary words, but really they're not that scary because you guys do it every single day. So for the importance of sound, we've taken a field trip to Moore Creek, and we're walking down the trail, and we notice that there's some movement at the top of this tree. We know it's a bird, but we can't quite see what kind of bird. And then we hear this. Okay. Guesses? Right, it's a Steller's jay. So bioacoustically monitoring as we're walking down the trail, we detected a vocalization from a Steller's jay. And this gave us a whole bunch of information. It told us how big of a bird we're looking for, what color of a bird we're looking for. And you know what? We've seen a lot of Steller's jays, and we went down Moore Creek not to see a Steller's jay, but to see a pileated woodpecker. So we may not even look for the bird, and we might move on to the next tantalizing bird sound that we see. So there you go. Bioacoustic monitoring got you, and some bioacoustic analysis is done every time we go out and we go birding. So here's the scientist version of it. So I'm back to soundscapes to landscapes, and I have taken one of their recordings and I'm using it in my presentation here. And we're going to listen to it. So this, I don't know which habitat it was put into. This would be a 1-minute recording, but I'm only having us listen to the first 15 seconds or so. Okay, so hopefully if the audio was good enough, and I have to say with Zoom, that's always a hit or miss thing, but you should have been able to hear a couple of different species. Well, in addition to these having these audio recordings and documenting where the species are, they have another tool as well, and it's called a sonogram. So a sonogram is basically a picture of sound. So this is a sonogram of that recording that I just showed you. Along this axis is pitch. So if a bird that is singing is really high pitched, like a chestnut-backed chickadee, its vocalizations will be seen here. If it's a lower pitched bird, like a black-headed grosbeak, its vocalization is seen down here. So I'm gonna play this again. Oh, and this is seconds, so it runs like a movie. So first the warbling vireo sings, the black-headed grosbeak sings, there's a Pacific slope flycatcher here, chestnut-backed chickadee, and then the black grosbeak goes again. And of course, all of this here is actually chestnut-backed chickadee. So let me hit play again. Okay, and what these sonograms provide us, other than, they're kind of cool, is that they're a tool where, in addition to analyzing the audio with your ears, we also get to analyze them with our eyes. And we as humans are very good at seeing patterns with our eyes. We haven't practiced as much with our ears. So the volunteers, those of us that worked on the soundscapes to landscapes, what we'd be given is we'd go into these recordings and we'd be asked, identify every single species in the sonogram. And so we would do this, and then we would put these green tags onto recordings and say, okay, we have warbling vireo, we have orange-crowned warbler, we have northern flicker, common raven, acorn woodpecker. And what's neat is that on some of these birds, their pattern is so unique that you could actually pick out that there was going to be a bird, even just from looking at the pattern. So for example, here, this is orange-crowned warbler. There's another orange-crowned warbler right there, right? And so orange-crowned warbler, we got very good at, you'd bring up a sonogram and without even having to hit play, you could say, yep, we got an orange-crowned warbler there. Pacific slope flycatcher was another one. They have these little check marks that are really characteristic when they sing. Another advantage of a sonogram like this and us being able to communicate volunteer to volunteer using an image like this is I could say, you know, David Leland, I think this right here is a black-headed grosbeak, but I'm not certain. Can you go to this recording and look at where I've drawn a box around and tell me whether or not that particular set of section of vocalization is a black-headed grosbeak, or did I get it wrong and it's actually an American robin? And so anyway, I love sonograms. Only been recently introduced to them in the last 4 years, but they're very, very handy tool for us scientists and us citizen scientists. Okay. So that's where I got the idea of using these audio recorders to document bird vocalizations. And the Soundscapes to Landscapes was doing a phenomenal job of identifying whether species were absent or present. But I wanted to take it to a different level. I wanted to see, could you map multiple vocalizations from a single species to behaviors? And if you could do that, could you map out through time when those vocalizations were happening and be able to tell something about that species? So I'm using song sparrow as an example here to introduce this concept, because song sparrow is Napa solano audubon's bird. And I went and I read, there's a thing online that it's a really great resource, although you have to pay to have access to it, called Birds of the World Online, done by Cornell. So I went to Birds of the World Online, Cornell, and I went and got a list of all the calls that song sparrows make. And it's amazing. I had no idea they had this many different kinds of calls. I was familiar with a couple of them. The first one that I'm familiar with was the contact call. You hear this note all the time. I call it bark. Others call it the VIMP, V-I-M-P, or chimp, C-H-I-M-P call. And it's basically, here I am, and the birds kind of talking back and forth to each other. Another call is an alarm call, and this one sounds like this. And so this is the type of vocalization you would hear, like if a hawk flew over, dog was nearby, that kind of thing. So you can see if I had recordings and I understood and had basically a dictionary of what these different sounds meant, I could listen to the recordings and maybe figure out what was going on with the birds. And so that was my hope with the tricolored blackbirds. But challenge number one was, what do the vocalizations sound like? And what's the repertoire of vocalizations that they make? So I started doing some research through literature, and I found two really nice pieces of work. They were both done in the late 1960s. One was a PhD dissertation, last name of Collier, and the other was an actual publication by Oriens and Christman. I believe I've got his name right. And they studied blackbirds. I mean, it's like a 62-page paper. This isn't like a regular paper. This is more like they're both like small books on these birds. So I sat down and read them, and they describe probably 30 different kinds of vocalizations that these different birds do. And it's pretty amazing. The problem was that there were no audio recordings to accompany these original works. So that meant that I needed to try to figure out what they sounded like. So I went on to Zeno-Canto, and I went on the Macaulay Library, and all about birds and birds of the world. And I really couldn't find anything except for the male song, which sounds like this. Let me do that again, because it went by quick. And I know this might be kind of quiet, so here we go. People say it sounds like a strangling cat, but I already knew that one because I'd been out in the field with these tricolored blackbirds, and this is like a huge ruckus that goes on. So that one I had. The rest of them, though, I just had these phonetic spellings of what it sounded like tree, tree, tree. And honestly, I'm looking at that, and the first thing that jumps into my head is Sue saying, trees, trees, pretty trees, and which is a brown creeper and not a female song. And so I just was having a really hard time wrapping my head around what these actually would sound like out in the field. So I knew that I was going to have to go out and do some education in the field with the birds. Challenge number 2, can I use vocalizations over time to document the life cycle of the colony? So I've got these vocalizations, and I'm going to try and say, on February 28th, I heard this, didn't hear this, but on March, I started hearing this. But would I be able to, once that all was said and done, end up with anything that made sense? Or were these vocalizations not very specific? So for example, female song, if they just sing all the time, then it's not going to tell me anything about some very specific behaviors that I was looking for. So I didn't know if the pattern of the timing of these different kinds of vocalizations would really end up giving me the timing of behaviors that I was hoping for. A third challenge was, would I be able to hear those different vocalizations in a really loud colony? Now remember, these colonies are can be, well, the Rush Ranch was 2,000 or so, but they can be tens of thousands of birds. And since they're synchronized, they're all saying the same thing at the same time, and they're all talking over each other. And this is a sonogram of one of these colonies, and you can see it's really blurry. You can't see any specific vocalizations because you have 1,000 birds all talking at the same time. I'm going to hit play here. It's a little bit quiet. If you were in the field, this would be deafening, but here you go. Okay, and so my concern specifically, and this is Mark, I think this is your photo or it's Lucas's, I'm not sure, but I definitely got it from one of your trips out to the Hay landfill site. This is a female, obviously making some sort of vocalization here. And I had been told by those that had been, spent years out in the field with these birds that the females are almost silent, that you really can't hear them that well. And so I was very concerned if there was this much noise going on in the colony, would I be able to even hear some of these vocalizations? And especially, would I be able to hear them using my audio recorders? How good were they at picking up these kinds of vocalizations? And as far as challenge number 4 here, how do I collect the recordings? The actual collecting of them was really pretty simple. The Soundscapes to Landscapes team had already figured it all out, and I just copied them. We started out with a different version of a recorder. What I'm showing here is our latest version, which I really love. It's called an Audio Moth. It is about the size of a deck of cards. It's basically a computer board attached to 3 AA batteries, with some plastic. It's got a teeny tiny microphone right here, and you put a little SD card here. This little switch, you turn it to on, and it starts recording. And you can program it. There's a little app here where you tell it how often you want to do a recording. I programmed mine to do a recording once every 20 minutes. That resulted in 72 recordings every day. Okay, so luckily one challenge was done. 5th challenge, this one I really didn't know how I was going to do this. How do I analyze all those thousands of recordings? I met with someone about doing audio recording, and they said, you know, it's really great that people go out there and they make all these audio recordings, but I bet 99% of those audio recordings get put onto a hard drive and put on a shelf and nothing happens with them. And I can see why. So here is one of my folders that has these audio recordings in it. This is the rush ranch, that's what the RR is. And if you look really closely down here, you might not be able to see it. It says 699 items. So I have 700 recordings here, and that's for February. So I have multiple folders with multiple hundreds. At the end of the season for this Rush Ranch study, I had nearly 10,000 recordings. And so how do you take this and turn it into something that tells you about the behavior of the birds? All right, so going back to my first challenge was figuring out some vocalizations. If I couldn't do that, then I wasn't going to go anywhere fast. So I forgot to mention something. So in 2017, I think, well, actually I did mention it. So Alex and Julie were going out in the field twice a week and doing the observations of, visual observations of were they carrying nesting material, were they carrying food and so forth, and keeping notes for me. While they were doing that, that freed me up to go, and I visited the colony 30 times myself, so about twice a week during that season. And I would show up just before sunrise, which meant that I was often leaving Napa at around 4 o'clock in the morning so that I could get there, get parked, and get hiked to my site before the sun came up, because I wanted to see the behaviors of the birds right at the beginning, right as they were beginning to wake up, so that I could get the full range of types of behaviors they had. And I sat and I made lots of notes in my little yellow Write in the Rain notebook. This is actually a video recorder. I made video recordings trying to get specific birds, and it had a microphone on it. You can't see it there, but trying to get specific vocalizations and tie them to specific behaviors, and largely just sitting and watching and just letting the birds teach me about them. At the end of the season, I was really pleased. I actually found that there were like 5 or 6 of the vocalizations that had been mentioned in those original papers that I had figured out. And there were 3 in particular that I decided I would focus on for the analysis. And these are male song, which you've heard. I'll play it again. Female song. Okay, I'm going to play that one just one more time so you get a chance to hear it. Female song. And then nestlings peeping, they're loud. Okay, now the reason why I picked those 3 was because male song, they sing when they're trying to talk the gals into nesting. So that was going to give me some information about behavior. Female song, because the papers about the blackbird behaviors mention that tricolored blackbirds make this nest chatter from the time that they start building their nest all the way through until their eggs hatch. So if I heard female song, I was experiencing nesting behavior. Nestlings peeping, when they first start peeping, that means that they've recently hatched. And I actually can hear the difference between a young nestling and a much older nestling. So I can get date of hatching. That was the hope. And when females stop their song, so as I said, the females will sing as they approach their nest while they're incubating up until the point that their eggs hatch. So when my hope was when a colony had hatched all of its eggs, then the female song would stop. And that when the nestling calls in, that meant that the birds had left the area, and I might have a date as to when they actually fledged. So that was my hope there. As far as analyzing the data, I used the same software that Point Blue used. It's a piece of software called Arbamon. Mainly I used it because it's free, but in addition to it being free, it's actually a really awesome tool. You can get your data up into the cloud, and then you're using Amazon Web Services to do the heavy crunching and stuff that sometimes you need to do with these large data sets. And that meant that I could get by doing analysis. This is actually me when I was traveling in Iceland in a hotel room doing some of the analysis. You can do it on a little laptop with hardly any room on your laptop because the data doesn't actually live there. So a whole bunch of reasons for using it. But what you can do is you can navigate to a specific day, site, a specific day, and then listen to the recording. And this is a blow up of this section, side panel here. You can go through and say whether or not a particular vocalization is present or not. So in this recording, for example, nestlings, and I heard a nestling or fledgling, and I said it was present. I heard a female nest chatter or a female song, I marked it as present, but I didn't hear male singing, so I didn't mark it as present. The other thing I did was I decided that I did not need to listen to all 10,000 recordings. I decided that what I would do is I would take a subset of those recordings and see how the data panned out. And my decision was I would do 1 an hour on all of the daylight hours. So that meant that I had about 13 recordings every single day that I listened to, and then did this annotation. That still left me 1,500 recordings to look through. So there was plenty of work to do. Once you've gone through Arbamon and you've made those little marks to say things are absent or present, there's a button where you can go and you can download your results. And when you download your results, you can get them out of Excel. And then I did some kind of fancy stuff to add color and do some math on it. But you can just pull the information out of Arbamon, which I think is really crucial to getting that data off of the shelf and actually analyzed. This is a blow up of a few of the days of the analysis. For the rest of this talk and previous talk, you will have noticed probably male song is going to be represented in green, female song is represented in purple, and nestling calls are represented in blue. For each day, I've got a percentage of the recordings that where I heard the vocalization. So let's take May 12th. Out of the 13 recordings, 100% of them had male song. A third of them had female song, and only 8%, or basically one recording, did I hear a nestling call. The intensity of the color gives you an idea just at a glance of how many of the recordings there were. So if it's 100%, it's the brightest green or the brightest purple. If it's a lower number like the 8%, you've got a light blue versus this 50%, which is a darker blue. Okay, so that's what the graph looks like blown in. I'm going to zoom way out now. You won't be able to see any of the numbers, but I'm going to show you what an entire season, 145 days, looks like for Rush Ranch. And here we are. Now, I know a lot of people may not like looking at graphs nearly as much as I do, but I love this graph. It tells me so much information. And Alex and Julie did a fantastic job of taking notes so that I could correlate this and be more certain that the behaviors were lining up with my audio. But unlike the field visits, the audio analysis could tell me some really specific things. It could tell me the exact number and the dates of nesting attempts. So for example, males here, they just sang. They sang, they got a little bit quiet, they sang, and then they got quiet and then end of season. But on the females, I had 3 rounds of nesting. This first one wasn't quite as intense, so there might not have been as many birds calling. But the second was really intense, and as was the third round of nest chatter, nest song. The other we have here are the babies. So after you've done your nests, you have your babies hatch and you hear them. Again, that first round, I think there were not as many birds. And so the colors are a bit lighter and they're a little bit harder to hear throughout. But then here comes round 2. And round 3 came so close to round 2 that the round 2 babies were still around when round 3 babies hatched. So I actually couldn't get a hatch date for babies number 3 because of the fact that there was this overlap of nestling calls of the 2. In addition to knowing that they successfully hatched and approximately the day that they hatched, I could tell if the baby successfully fledged. And how I did that was you look at, well, let's take this one because it's a little easier idea. You look at the last day, you're hearing a nest, a female song, because they all stop once everybody's hatched. And then you start counting out numbers of days to see if the babies existed, baby calls existed for the length of time that it would take them to fledge. And it takes them somewhere around 20 days. We're going to get more specifics on that in another slide. But I could just count out and go, okay, day 23, I don't hear any more babies. They fledged and we're in good shape. So this made me really excited. You pair this with some observations and now we're really getting a really good idea of what's going on in this colony. So I decided, let's see how this goes. Let's repeat it. You never want to do something once and make a bunch of claims about what you can and can't do. You need to repeat it. So in 2018 and 2019, I put recorders out again. Between the two seasons, it was at 9 different locations. Some of those locations were repeated in both years. Some were only done in single years. But I got a lot of data. And I'm not going to show you all of the graphs from all of those sites. While I like looking at them and I love geeking out to seeing all of those graphs, I think instead, I know instead, I'm going to show you some of the stories that those graphs told me and some of the insights that I got on the colonies by looking at those graphs. So first of all, putting the audio recorders out there helps me understand the timing of a colony, which in turn can let me help the landowner. So tricolored blackbirds are listed as threatened under the California Endangered Species Act. So this means that they're protected by the law from disturbance of their breeding. So if you're a landowner and you have one of these colonies on your property, you have to cease and desist anything that might disrupt and disturb their breeding. So this happened with a company that what they do is they do this thing, it's called a mitigation bank. And what they do is they take habitat and they turn it into great wildlife habitat ahead of time. And then when somebody has to destroy wetland, then they can purchase this property and then that company now has more money and they can go on and rehab another property and get it ready to go. And so they were in the process of rehabbing this previous cattle field into wetland for different species. And right as they got all their really heavy equipment out there to dig the vernal ponds and all of this, the tricolored blackbirds showed up at the field next by and decided that they were going to nest. So they had to stop all of their activities until they were done. And the big question was, well, when are they going to be done? Because they wanted to be, it was expensive to have all this equipment, and they wanted to know when they might need to, do they need to turn the equipment in? Should they keep a hold of it? That kind of questions, and it's expensive questions for them. So in an attempt to figure that out, we took the audio here and we recorded the colony. Now, one small note that we need to know before we go on is that fledglings leave marshes at different times depending upon the type of habitat it is. If there's tall vegetation available, a fledgling will typically, the fledglings, the whole group of them, right? They go as a group. The fledglings will leave the marsh and be done with it about 15 to 22 days after they hatch. If on the other hand, it's more like a rush ranch situation and there isn't really any tall vegetation around, the fledglings stick around a little bit longer, upwards of 25 plus days. I think this is because the fledglings, if there's tall vegetation around, when they're not such great flyers, have somewhere to go and hide and not get eaten by that northern harrier that loves to come in and pick them off. Whereas when they're in short vegetation, they got to be a lot better at flying to be able to pop up and get somewhere and be safe. But anyway, the Markham Ravine colony had a bunch of willows nearby and had tall vegetation. So I was estimating that it would take the babies somewhere between 15 to 22 days from the time they hatched to when they would be leaving the colony. So here, the last day the female song was heard was June 2nd. That's right here. And the last day fledgling calls was heard was June 21. You do the math there, you've got 19 days, which is right in the 15 to 22 day mark. So this made me really, really happy. And I feel like now, if a landowner wanted to ask, I could do a recording at the right time and give them a fairly accurate estimate of when they could expect the colony to be done so that they could start doing some of their planning of their work. Okay, so that's how you can help landowners, because you don't want landowners totally hating on these birds. You know, we don't want to impact them any more than we need to, because we just want good feelings amongst everyone. Okay. Another thing that this analysis I found useful for this analysis was understanding causes of failures. So many times colonies don't work. Sometimes they come in, they start, and they just abandon. Other times they come in, get started, actually are fairly successful, and then just don't make it all the way to fledging. And understanding exactly what's the timing of things can help you try to puzzle out what was going on. So this is a colony that failed. It's Markham Ravine 2. It's actually across the street from where the other colony was located. And this is my graph of the audio recordings. Again, these are male song. This is female song. And this is nestlings calling. And we had this big event. It was a huge rainstorm that year. And I remember exchanging emails with one of the collaborators, Dan, and he was just so worried about the colonies that were out there, because if these colonies are at different stages and throughout California. So, but if you had a colony that was at a stage where they had really young nestlings when this storm happened, it's really bad news, because the babies get wet, the nests get soggy, and the babies catch hypothermia and they end up dying. And sure enough, here we are, we've got this event, and just a couple of days later, actually like the next day, the female nest chatter stops, and 2 or 3 days after that, I didn't hear any more babies. And I think this was me, this is a screw up, I don't think this is actually there. But so unfortunately, it appears that after these couple of days, any young birds that were there did not make it through this rainstorm. Another failure we had was at a colony called Iron Point. This is in Folsom County, and it is a little pond. And at that particular year, they were doing this huge construction project, a huge housing construction project right next to the colony. California Fish and Game was actually watching this place a bit like a hawk, because they knew that there were birds there, and they knew that this construction could possibly disrupt it. Well, I get this call from Dan, my collaborator, saying, you got to get over to Iron Point, tons of birds there, let's get a recorder in. I go driving over, meet him. He and his wife give me coffee and bagel, and we go driving over to this colony, pop this recorder in. And they were already going, so you know, they were already in nesting, so they were already making the nest chatter. And then I went home, and a couple of weeks later, you know, Dan calls me back and he says, they're all gone. They've abandoned the colony. So I went and I got my recorder, and I listened to the recordings, and I'm like, yep, I can even tell you the day they left, right here. The females didn't hear a nest chatter after this point, and like the next day didn't hear any males. And then every once in a while, I would have this one male that would like occasionally show up and go, well, and you could hear him singing, but it was just this one guy. So the bulk of the colony left right here. And while I can't say whether or not it was construction that caused these birds to move on and decide not to stay, what I was able to do was California Fish and Game, or Fish and Wildlife, contacted me, and I could tell them, I can't tell from the vocalizations what the birds were scared off by, but I can tell you the day they left. And I was hopeful that with that in hand, they could correlate that with any activities that they had documented during the construction to see if maybe they could enforce some things that were not maybe being followed as well as they should have been. Okay. Another, and this is like the last one as far as the lessons I learned by studying these birds, is tracking the health of a colony through time. So Rush Ranch, I started in Rush Ranch. I've recorded there every single year since then. And the first year, it was just blockbuster. I mean, 3 rounds of nesting. I had read several things that sometimes they do multiple pulses, as in 2. I don't know, nobody told me they did 3. So I was just, wow, that these birds were just going for it. And there were just so many babies, and it was just so impressive. Well, the next year in 2018, we did have 2 different times that the females made their nest song, their nest chatter. The first time, it was half-hearted. There were a few birds that were doing the female song, and it never stuck. The second time, on the other hand, was, gray means no data. It means I had a recorder failure. It was a really windy day, by the way. But we had a nice solid block of lots of singing, and then the babies started to hatch. And you can tell here this was the last day that the babies hatched, and we successfully had babies all the way out, and they fledged. In 2019, completely different story. We again had, and it's interesting that these pulses are kind of lining up. There's a little bit of a slant to them, but the nest chatter again started at the beginning of April. Nothing came of it. Again, they came back middle of May, but this time nothing came of it. They just never ended up settling down. They were pretty serious here, but we never ended up with any babies hatching. So they didn't take the eggs to incubation. So I was curious. We also got recordings from 2020. I did manage to get a few recordings out into the field last year, even though it was a little bit strange. I have not done the analysis yet, so I can't tell you how it did in 2020, but according to Mark and Lucas, who were my eyes in the field for 2020, there just weren't any birds at Rush Ranch, and in fact, the pond was dry that year. So I expect that we're gonna get a similar result. So this was really concerning to me. There was all this effort to make this wonderful pond, and yet for some reason, the birds were just choosing not to use it anymore, or were not being successful there anymore. And got into discussions with Solana Land Trust, and they were asking, what is it that we need to do to encourage these birds and get it back to where it was? And so I contacted Bob Meese again, and he told us, well, you haven't cut back the old cattails. And if you don't cut back the cattails, what ends up happening is all these old cattails build up and basically make ramps. And the birds understand that these ramps mean that predators have better access to their nests, and so they'll choose not to nest in a marsh where there's a lot of this buildup of previous old cattails. So every couple of years, you've got to remove some of that material. And Rush Ranch, it hasn't been done. And so the hope is that, and again, this is a weird year, so I don't know if there'll be an opportunity to get in there and do that cleanup this year. But there's, we now were able to empower this landowner to go in and make the right steps that'll hopefully refurbish this area, and the birds will come back. And what's nice about this is I'm still putting my recorders out in Rush Ranch, even with the failures, because I would love to document how they're responding prior to the cleanup of the old cattails, and then see what happens after the cattails have been taken out, and like how long does it take them to come back, and how quickly do they come back. So that's going to be a really fun study. Okay, another thing about tracking through time is climate. Now, climate is affecting a lot of our birds. I'm going to get on to a bit of that on the next slide. But of course, since I'm partial to these tricolored blackbirds, I was really wondering how they climate might affect tricolored blackbirds. And I'm betting that this data that I'm collecting through time is going to help with that tracking. But I'm going to switch gears now, and I'm going to talk about climate for a little bit and how it is. National Audubon has made these models that are predicting how climate's going to affect birds. So this was a study, originally came out, I think 2014, and they came out with a new one in the last couple of years, updated it. And what they did is they looked at a whole bunch of factors of what does a robin need? You know, what kind of habitat does a robin hang out in summer? And what kind of habitat does a robin hang out in winter? And then they said, okay, this is the recipe for robin habitat. And then they went and said, well, if climate changes, where in the US will that habitat still exist? And if that is greatly reduced, then these birds are at risk of extinction. And so from their models, and I'm simplifying it a lot, but from their models, they're estimating that if we do that 3 degrees C temperature rise, 2/3 of North American birds are at risk, at increasing risk of extinction from climate change. And specifically, I wanted to know, how will climate change affect the tricolored blackbirds? If you want to explore this on your own, you go to climate.audubon.org, or maybe audubon.climate.org. I always get that mixed up, but Climate Audubon, and you'll get this web page. And if you scroll down, you can actually type in the bird that you're interested in. So I did that, and I typed in tricolored blackbird. And you get a series of maps. So here is the tricolored blackbird summer habitat. All this in yellow is where they currently, the areas that they currently use in summer. You can see up here, there's a little bit up on the Columbia Gorge and a little smattering here, but the bulk of it, oops, I did a click. The bulk of it is here in California. This shows what the habitat will be like if there's a 3 degrees C change in temperature, and it's color coded. What red is, these are areas that are currently habitat that are going to be lost. They're no longer going to be compatible for a tricolored blackbird. The yellow is the areas that are current that are going to remain, and blue are areas that are new. They're areas that the tricolored blackbird is not currently using, but the models say they may decide, you know, that everything's right. And so if the tricolored blackbird got there and you could convince it to use this area, it might be suitable for the tricolored blackbird. Putting it into a bar graph over here, this is, if we look at this as the 100%, this is the current habitat. We see that 60% of the current habitat is predicted to be lost. 40% will remain, and there'll be an increase of about 33%, but only if the birds can move, choose to move, and if the models are correct. Given all of this, National Audubon has assigned this bird a vulnerability of going extinct due to the summer habitat change as moderate. Going to the next slide, this is the winter habitat. It looks an awful lot like the summer habitat, you'll notice. But the prediction of how climate's going to affect the habitat in winter is strikingly different. So what you see here is they are predicting that all this in red is going to go away, and it's just not going to be usable. There's like a little tiny bit, I bet it's on top of a mountain or something here down in Baja, California. And then you've got a tiny little bit of blue up in Seattle that pops up that would be a gain. And if you look at it as a bar chart, 99% of the current habitat in winter that tricolored blackbirds use, according to these models, if we get that 3 degrees C rise in temperature, is going to be something that they can't utilize or want to utilize. only 1% of that original habitat will remain. There will be a 4% increase or gain in habitat that they're not currently using that they might be interested in using. So it doesn't look so great for tricolored blackbirds. Now this is a 3 degrees C change. What we're hoping is that we can keep it to a 1.5 degrees C change. You can put that in the model as well. The numbers look significantly better. They're still not great, but they look significantly better. Okay, so that's okay. Yes, and vulnerability, National Audubon, you lose 90%, 99% of your habitat. Of course, the predictions are that this bird is going to have a high vulnerability for extinction if that happens. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I'm just going to show you a video about the Citizen Science Project, Climate Watch. Mark talked about how we're currently involved in this project. We have been for the last 4 years. And I'm going to feature it because you can see how important it was for, even though this is we're focusing on white-breasted nuthatch, the information gained in this kind of a study, even on a few species, it helps them improve their models, and therefore it helps us understand for all the birds what's going on. So I think it's a really great program, and I really think we need to get as much data as we can. So I'm gonna let their little video run, and I'll be back after.
Birds are barometers of change. Their close relationships with plants and insects allow them to tell us when things are changing in our environment. Climate change is the biggest threat to birds around the world, and Audubon volunteers and scientists are working hard to understand what birds are telling us about it. But we need your help. If you enjoy getting outside and can identify a few common bird species, then Audubon's new community science program, Climate Watch, is a great way for you to help by collecting vital information on how birds are already shifting their ranges in response to climate change. Join Climate Watch volunteers each winter and summer as we head out to nearby spots where species are expected to either appear or disappear as the climate changes. Together, our observations can help reveal whether birds are keeping up with climate change, as well as give us clues as to what challenges they face and how to help them. Want to get involved and help the birds tell us about climate change? Head over to audubon.org/climatewatch to learn how you can participate.
Okay, so that's Climate Watch in a nutshell. And it's been a pretty successful program. They've gotten participants. This is 2018. Since then, it's grown even more. I need to update this map, but you can see the number of checklists that are getting submitted across, and this was just winter of 2018. I'd like to see a little bit more going on over here. So Mark mentioned I'm the coordinator for Napa Solano Audubon. I'm also just stepped up for them and told them that I would be a regional coordinator. So I've also working with Wintu Audubon, Mount Diablo Audubon, several individuals in Sacramento, a couple individuals in Monterey, and coordinating to getting more of these surveys done. So if you're interested in participating in a project like this, let me or Mark know and we can get you set up. But I'm going to take one slide and tell you the basics of it. It's pretty simple. First of all, you work with a coordinator to select a species. The species are nuthatches, bluebirds, goldfinches, and spotted towhee. I think I've got them all. There's also painted bunting, but we don't have that here. We've been focusing mainly on bluebird and nuthatches just because that's what they started with. They've added these other birds since the project has grown. And with that, working with that coordinator, what that coordinator does is they take your area and they divide it, National divides it up into squares. And that coordinator, once we pick the species, finds a square that would be really good for surveys for that bird. And then using tools that Audubon gives the coordinator or anybody who wants to learn how to use them, you work to put 12 points within that square that a person can go and visit, but each point has to be 200 meters from the next point, okay? So that's the hard part. And you only do that once, and then once that's done, survey points are set, and then it's just going out and birding and having fun. So you get your points, and twice a year, you go out and you conduct 5-minute survey at each point. So some people do multiple squares, but if you sign up for only one square, we're talking about going out on one nice day between May 15th, June 15th, and navigating to each of these 12 points in a single day, stopping for 5 minutes and just listening and watching, and you record every single bird you see or hear. And then you submit those results to the Climate Watch team, and they've got this portal, and you just fill it out. If you use eBird, you put in your eBird checklist here, and you hit submit, and they've got your data. So it's a really simple program, and it's really fun. And yes, even though, let's say, not red-breasted, but for Napa solana, we do white-breasted nuthatch. Let's say you're doing a white-breasted nuthatch as your focal bird, you're still reporting on every single bird that you see, every single one. It's just that by picking the species, this is how we decide on the square and the point, kind of optimized for this kind of species. Oh, my internet's unstable. Okay. Yeah, okay. I think we're still good. Okay. So if you're interested, again, contact Mark or I. We really could use more help. I don't care where you're at. If you're interested in it, let me know, and I can help get you started and get you set up. All right. So I want to wrap up here. So I'm going to tell you about my future work that I'm doing. So in 2021, my goal is to get recorders into 50 different colonies. I'm working with Audubon, California, and the Tricolored Blackbird Working Group to locate a bunch of colonies that we can deploy these recorders into. By doing this many colonies, I'm hoping to get a range of habitats. So they currently are nesting in wetland, blackberry, and this triticale grain. I understand there's a couple of other strata that they also nest in. I'd love to get colonies that are doing different types of nesting situations because maybe their behaviors are different. I also want to get a range of geography. Right now, I'm just, you know, in our area between Solano County and up towards the foothills, but right in Central Valley, and I don't have a lot of diversity. So I would love to get some coastal colonies, as well as the inland colonies. I'd like to get that northern colony that's up in the Columbia Gorge. I'd like to get all the way down. There's some really nice ones down in the San Diego area. I also want to train the computer to assist me in analysis. So the Arbamon software, it's possible to do that. And I have started doing some of the training, and it looks promising at this point. So hopefully I won't be spending quite so much time behind the computer, because if I do 50 colonies, I'm going to have to simplify this somehow. I want to track climate. I want to see, you know, we've got these areas that they are predicting are going to get worse for tricolored blackbirds, and areas that are going to remain the same, and some new areas. Are colonies that are in these areas that are getting worse, are they more likely to fail than colonies that are in areas that are remaining optimized for tricolored blackbirds? And also, are they changing the timing of their breeding at all in response to climate change? And lastly, I want to apply the tool to additional species. So I've been really wanting to try to put these in leks. So greater prairie chicken, sharp-tailed grouse, these kinds of birds, the males all get together on these dancing platforms called leks and perform these vocalizations and dances. And I thought it would be a really neat place to see if I could get multiple vocalizations and tell what's going on. So I've contacted a group in Nebraska, and this March, I'm gonna go out and we're going to do a pilot study to see how this kind of tool works with those species. Now, how can you help? Well, as I mentioned, I would really love it if people were willing to participate in Climate Watch. You don't have to be a great birder. It doesn't matter. This could be your chance to learn a few birds. The main thing would be to study up on your focal birds so you can really understand that one. And that's not going to be too much to learn. Also, birds can't vote, birds can't talk. So we need to get out there and we need to vote for the environment and be their voices for them. All right, so that wraps up my talk pretty much, but I did want to leave you with a couple of bloopers. So one thing that has occurred over and over and over again during my field seasons is really interesting times with cows. So the very first time I went out to Rush Ranch, I went out to place my recorders, and the guy that was the manager at the time told me, yeah, just go on out, open up the fence and go through. The cattle weren't in there, but we've excluded them all. And place your recorder and you're good to go. Well, I show up and this is my pond. So the cattle had managed to get through the gate, open the gate, or someone left that, opened the gate and left it open on accident. So all the cattle were actually on the site. So instead of my first day being listening to the Tricolored Blackbirds, it was herding the cattle with the help of Solano Land Trust and my husband Mike to get the cattle out. It was quite amusing getting them through. Another interesting blooper with cows that I had. Let's see. We're going to listen to this. So if you were able to hear that and guess what's going on there, yes, that is a cow licking my recorder. This is a time when I had a different kind of recorder and had these little microphones that stuck out of them. And we went out into the field to check on it, and sure enough, my microphone was sitting on the ground and the recorder had been knocked off. These guys are really curious guys, and they mess with your recorder. So it's always a challenge to try and find, because a lot of the sites I do actually have cattle there. So you're trying to figure out where can you tuck the recorder so that the curious cow doesn't end up eating your recorder. Okay. So that's my bit of funny, but I also wanted to get back to this. I titled my thing, Do Blackbirds Sing in the Dead of Night? Of course, I was doing a play on a song. It was an easy title, but if you want to know the answer, here's a recording from Rush Ranch that was taken at midnight. So yeah, the answer is, yeah, they sometimes do sing in the dead of night. I actually hadn't expected that at all. Okay, so that's all I've got for you tonight. I'm gonna leave my contact info up there for anyone who wants to write it down and email me about either the Tricolored Blackbirds or the Climate Watch program. And I have a lot of thanks to give. There were a whole lot of people that were involved in helping me out in this project, and they're listed here. And I will take any questions if we have time for questions. I hand it back to Mark, I think. Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for questions, Wendy.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share now. There.
There we go. You know, one interesting thing that Tom Sliker found out when he wrote a research paper on tricolored blackbirds for our newsletter is that in the 1800s, some of the early settlers described the most common bird in California as being the tricolored blackbird. Millions and millions of tricolored blackbirds. So that's what's happened to our habitats. And unfortunately, with climate change impacting them even more than as much as development, it's scary.
Yes, absolutely.
So questions for Wendy. You have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you.
I've got one, Mark.
Yes.
And Wendy, you showed that climate map in like 90% plus of the habitat for the birds was going to be lost in winter. What is actually changing, or what do they think is going to change that would cause that much of loss with just 3 degrees temperature change? I'm can't fathom what it would be that would make that much difference in the life of a bird.
Yeah, I don't know. They spend their winter, fattening up for the next season. Maybe the climate's going to change in a way, I don't know, that impacts insects or the grains they eat, or I don't know what, but how they make these models is they say these blackbirds have picked particular areas that they hang out in. And these areas have these characteristics. And if they don't have these characteristics, we don't see tricolored blackbirds there. So when the temperature changes 3 degrees, where's those characteristics? Where are they left? Where's the habitat that's left with that? And it's gone. Now, it's possible that the birds will adapt to a different kind of habitat, but they're not choosing to do so now. They're choosing to stay in these specific areas. And it's that, and specifically what it is, I don't know. With each bird, it's a different set. They model tons of different attributes of an area. So elevation, temperature, rainfall, urban development, all these things. And for specifically on the tricolor, I don't know. I don't know what it is that's causing it to be unsuitable.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
It's hard to believe that 3 degrees would wipe out an entire population of birds, or take, whether it's food or whether it's just livable space, or what it would be that would change that dramatically. So. Yeah,
I know, but we've had similar changes in the past that are of similar or even less magnitude, and we've had great losses and gains of species over time. So we're kind of a fickle, special thing, living beings.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tom. And I think, models are models, and they might not be quite accurate, but undoubtedly they have some information that is leading them to those conclusions.
Yeah, yeah.
And fingers crossed they're wrong, and that's part of the reason why I want to continue doing this tracking, and to see if maybe if it is wrong. And I'll say in 2014, they made a set of maps and they didn't have as much data. And there are some birds that in 2017 had dramatically different maps than they did in 2014. And I'm sure that's because they got better data on those species, or better information to make their models different. So like burrowing owl in 2014 was a bird that was supposed to have a whole bunch of problems. Well, in this new set of models, it's not. It's actually a fairly stable species. So, this is partly why we're doing the climate watch, is to help us figure out and make better predictions going forward than what we've got right now.
I hope you're right about burrowing owls, because a number of colonies nearby have vanished this last year or two. So
yeah, well, California's
more
been
habitat
kind of
loss than anything.
Yeah.
Other questions about blackbirds, or people who are raising their hands to volunteer for climate watch?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Wendy?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry if I hope I'm not interrupting. I kind of came a little late because of family reasons with your president, but let me tell you, I want to applaud you for your work. This is, I think, so relevant for Solano County, and I'll tell you why. Since 1998, my name is Roberto Valdez. I've been involved. I'm a stakeholder, a resident stakeholder, not a scientist, not a government agent. I just care about the wildlife in our area, particularly what's in Lagoon Valley. But I will tell you, I'm not sure you know, probably you know, I would think, because I've talked to Robin and a lot of people, especially him in regards to the, some other species like the Swainson Hawk, the Boring Owl, but the Tricolored Blackbird, it is one of the 37 species that has been targeted by the proposed Solano County uh, um, multi-species habitat conservation plan. It's an HCP, and it is necessary that we save that bird if we want to still get our water from Lake Berryessa, and we get in Vacaville where I live, we get 1/3 of the water from that lake, and it's a federal requirement. It's still being proposed. It's been on a work, but your data I think is so relevant because it gives us it gives not only the government, but also the developers and any stakeholder uh, that where the tricolor blackbirds are at, where they're moving, and of course climate change is becoming more evident. I just finished reading again. Let me know if I'm taking too much time, uh, but I just finished reading. I don't know if you read David Attenborough's book about a life in our planet. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
it makes it very clear. That I recommend everybody who's in this program to read it. You can get it from the library. You don't have to buy it. And let me tell you, it's climate is real to me. I don't have to be proved that it's impacting it, and it probably is impacting adversity. Unfortunately, as you said, probably the tricolored blackbirds. But it's very important that we get a realistic picture so that maybe we can change some people's mentality, a way of thinking, mindset about what are we going to protect, what are we going to while we're trying to, while we're making every effort as human beings to to infringe on wildlife habitat. So we need to rewild the wild habitats that we know of, the open spaces, and they're disappearing in Vacaville. I can tell you. I won't go into it tonight, but I will talk to you later. But my question to you, and I apologize for taking too long time. Have you shared this information in any form with the Solano County Water Agency? Because they are the leading agency for this plan. And if there's any plan, I think, and I've seen a lot of projects, I've seen a lot of development, and I fought a lot of fights about battles about protecting our wildlife. Let me tell you, it, um, if you share that information, I think it will be tremendous step forward. And again, I applaud you for all your work, and I would be interested in helping you, whatever form I can, and let's see where we go. But that species is so relevant to Solano County, and we'll know what will survive, and so that's a tremendous work you're doing there.
Mm.
So again, you know, my question again, have you shared this? I know you're working with what I gather, and I apologize if I don't know too much about you or what you're doing too well. Even though I am a Audubon member, a new one, and I'm learning as fast as I can from all of you. But I tell you that it's so important that we know where this species is going because of the plan. And this plan will have a tremendous. Everybody will win, whether you're a developer, a farmer, a resident. We need to have this plan. And I don't understand why we're taking so long to approve this plan that's been in the works for at least 15 to 20 years. We need to have some real substantive, positive steps. If we don't do it, we're going to lose our tricolored blackbird. We're going to lose everything else because we tend to be very foolish where we build and don't realize what we're stepping on, and maybe
So,
one day we can leave some areas open for those birds and other species. As you said, there's a lot of associated species, but and all that information you can get it from Solano County Water Agency, and it's you have a say so. We have a say so as residents here, and so um, again, I want to applaud you for all your work you do. I'd be very interested to find out where you're going with this and all your data And, so thank you again.
Well,
So a quick answer to that is no, I haven't shared it, but I do have a publication of the data.
Mhm. Well, that would be great because I can put you in contact with the real experts. But everybody has a say so in this
Yep.
part. Certainly, your work is so relevant, and you never know. You might even work on a grant or something with the Audubon. And I know you're all as Audubon members. You're all active in many different ways. But
well,
Tricolored
Roberto,
Blackbird
you
is
bring up a
pretty.
really good point, which is the water boards are very powerful entities, political entities in our areas. And if we can get water boards to side with us, to realize the importance of saving habitat, not only for better water, but also for the species that make them vibrant, that would be really huge. I
All
can
would.
share a couple of observations that Lucas and I made going to the 4 sites that we were monitoring in Solano County. The first is we used to go with Alex Green when all 4 colonies were in full force. And last year, when we appeared at Rush Ranch, the pond had almost dried up. And as Wendy had described, the cattails were dried and built up, and there was literally not a single tricolored blackbird anywhere to be found. So we actually scoured all of Rush Ranch as much as we could in search of tricolored blackbirds and could not find a single one. So fortunately, not far away is the Hay Road colony. And in that colony, there's probably more than 10,000 blackbirds. It's a very difficult colony to observe because it's right on Highway 113 and the cars go whizzing by really fast. So you have to be very careful if you pull over there. But it's fortunate that that colony is somewhat nearby. Interestingly enough, when we went to the Leisuretown Road colony, which is near development, but in a saved little culvert where there's a little marsh, a year ago, there was an active colony there. In the spring, when we visited, there were red-winged blackbirds in the cattails, and every time a tricolored would try to fly in and land, the redwings would chase them away. So in that case, in the early spring, the blackbirds vanished from the Leisuretown Road site. But Wendy told me she went back in the summer and the tricoloreds had come back in. So it's very interesting that they can have 2 or 3 different seasons in a season, and things change during that amount of time.
So Mark, that was Creed Road. I didn't see anything in Leisuretown.
Okay.
But I see a question here from Roland. He wanted to know if there are any colonies in the yellow bypass. And I wanted to say, yes, I understand there are. And I'm fairly new to the tricolored blackbird biology. So I'm just beginning to learn about all of them. But one of the tools we're using this year to try to figure out where where I'm going to put the recorders is I got access to eBird's database and was able to download all recordings of accounts of tricolored blackbirds historically over time. And we're using that database to look and see where people have reported birds at the right time in a good number of, to predict where we're seeing colonies, and yellow bypass was definitely one. Mike was looking at the data and he's like, well, did you know about the yellow bypass birds? And I'm like, no, but I guess I do now. So I believe that you're right, there are colonies at the yellow bypass. But I'd need to go out and confirm that myself or reach out to Bob Meese, who also probably knows about them because he's pretty familiar with most of the birds in that area.
Great question. And I'm sorry, it was Creed Road where the
Creed Road
came back in, and
yeah,
it's out in the vicinity of Highway 113, a little bit west of 113.
Yeah,
on Creed Road.
It's where we go out with Andrew or Murray and look for hawks in the middle of winter.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's a nice set of ferruginous and rough-legged hawks in that area right now.
Right.
There's fewer burrowing owls than we've seen in the past, but they may have just shifted their location as to where they are. I know they're still there. And then finally, one of our members, David and oh crap, I'm blanking on the name. I'm sorry, that's terrible.
I hate it when that happens.
It's age. It's all about age, I think. David and come on,
Denise?
Denise.
David and, okay.
Denise Hamilton.
Yes.
Out there, and they counted one day over 100 mountain plovers. And every time most people have been there, they've seen a small flock of between 40 and 60.
Right.
And it's nice to know those plovers hide in the grass, and the Hamiltons were able to find over 100. I think it was 140 or
Wow.
maybe even 200 at one point, that's very exciting because the mountain plover is another endangered species. Any last questions for Wendy before she signs off? Sue, you're sitting there very quietly. You're muted.
No, I'm just glad to be with you guys.
Hi, Sue. It is it's been frustrating. I've actually been back to, and I actually ran into you one of the times I came back at American Canyon, but I've been back like 2 or 3 times since COVID has hit, but I didn't feel like I could let anybody know I was there and go birding with them. So it's been insanely frustrating. I'm hoping by the time I come back out, I'll be coming out in May, June, that I'll actually be able to announce that I'm there, and maybe we can go gather a group of people and go bird American Canyon together or something. I would love to do that, or do bird seasons with Tom. Yeah, and that crew, you know. Anyway, it's nice seeing all your faces again.
Yeah, great.
Well, good. Well, I thank everyone for coming in. We had over 40 participants. It's pretty nice. Zoom, you don't have to leave your house in order to enjoy a really educational talk. So Wendy, thank you so much for delivering this. We will eventually put the recording up on our website. I added one of my own recordings there that I made for the Flyway Festival on our website. So if you go to the speaker series and click on that, there's a new presentation up there that many of you, if you didn't go to the Flyway Festival, probably haven't seen for your enjoyment. I hope to get Wendy's talk up there next week. I'm leaving very early in the morning for the Salton Sea, so I won't be around to put up the recording until next week. But thank you everyone for attending and for being such great listeners and so many wonderful questions. Anything else for the good of the order? So thank you, Wendy, again. We hope to see you. We hope you can come back real soon.
Yeah, me too.
Take care, folks. Our next speaker series is a month from today. This is the 20th. And I believe our next speaker series is March the 8th. Sorry, that's April. Sorry, March the 11th. March the 11th is our next speaker. And we are having two, let me make sure I've got this right. Yes, we're having two wonderful people from Point Blue, actually. Meredith Elliott and Mark Raison are speaking about population dynamics in double-crested cormorants. And they're two really great people, and I'm sure we're going to enjoy their talk as well. So that is Thursday, March 11th, about 1 month from today. So thank you, Wendy, and have a good evening, everyone. We'll sign off here. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.